I'm here today with Mr. Tim Dieppe. Hello, Tim.
Hi.
Did I get your surname right?
Yes, you did. Yeah,
I
yeah. That's it. Yeah.
I do like to try. I spoke to somebody recently, and I called them what was most obviously their name, and they said that's not how you say my name. And I thought, well, it certainly spells like it should be. So I do tread carefully and ask us.
Yeah. Well, people do make mistakes, so well done on that one.
I do
Yeah.
try. Right now, you are working for Christian Concern. You are the head
Yes.
of public policy. We've
Yes.
come online now specifically to talk about a book that you're launching in the future. But before we get onto that, which is where I want to really focus,
Mm.
just give us a bit of an overview. What is Christian Concern all about for people who've never heard of you before?
Sure. Yeah. Chris Concern is trying to be a voice for the church, or maybe a voice for Jesus, if you like, in the public square. So we campaign on various small issues. We run legal cases or support legal cases, in particular for Christians who run into problem in their workplace for their faith, for expressing their faith. Also street preachers and some other people, quite often it's teachers these days, complaining about sex education or something like that, or running into problems with a transgender child, this kind of thing. And we've had a wide range of successes. We get quite a lot of media attraction. The most recent sort of high-profile case is probably Darlington nurses, which you might have heard of, that got a lot of media attention. A man posing as a woman wanted to get changed, or is getting changed, in the female changing area, even though he's not even taking any hormones, and he's boasting that he wants to. He's trying to impregnate his girlfriend. So he's fully a man, and ask the women, when are you going to undress, and all this kind of stuff. And some of them being very disturbed by that and triggered on all of that kind of stuff. And they've managed to get a meeting with the Health Secretary West Streeting and with the Shadow Health Secretary Claire Cortino, and first sort of court hearing happened, I think, this week about that. So that gives you an example of the kind of things that we do.
Yeah, on that one, we spoke to Paul Huxley a little while ago, and he did help us just to get a bit of a focus on what's really going on. Because, of course, we read the media, we get their slant, and
Yep.
not being overly political, but they're going to have their own perspective and their own view and their own thoughts on it, and how they deliver that is going to be always obviously skewed by personal thought or the kind of leaning of
Yep.
that organization. So it
Yep.
is helpful, especially as Christians, to get what I would say was a Christian versioned of the events, but I mean, I would also say much more neutral and more factual, because it's less leaning towards a
Yep.
particular thing. It's just like, this is what's going on. So I was really grateful
Yep.
for Paul sharing with us about that one, just to get some of the real clear facts, I suppose. So today we want to look at more of the Muslim book that you've got coming out, but I thought it would be
Yep.
beneficial just before, because this is what we normally do. You're working for Christian Concern. Christian is in the word, so we would assume therefore that Christianity is a big part of it, and of course it is. But what is your personal story of faith to the point where you said, you know what, I'm gonna follow Jesus Christ?
Yeah, well, I grew up in a church-going family, and we went to church every week, and we went to a sort of youth group type thing every week as well and stuff. And but if you'd asked me as a young teenager, what does it mean to be a Christian, I'd have said something like trying to be good against church. That was about as much as I understood. But I went to a sort of evangelistic event in my early teenage years, and they explained that the reason Jesus died was to pay the price for my sins, and said I can be forgiven for all the things I've done wrong. And I thought, oh, this all makes sense. It all sort of clicked together in my head at once. And I responded and asked Jesus into my life and asked for forgiveness, and experienced God come into my life at that time, but didn't really have anything to follow that up with, and quickly sort of gave up on that. Nobody to disciple me, nobody to sort of put roots in, and I think I was something like the sort of stone that fell on rocky soil in the parable of the sower, and I sort of quickly sprout up and then no roots anywhere, so it withers and dies. But deep down, I knew that I had experienced God and something had happened there. But I became a very convinced atheist through much of my teenage years, to the point of not even believing in free will, and therefore no moral values and all of this kind of stuff. But still deep down, very deep down, I knew that there was something in this. And it was really only when I was able to meet some other Christians who could give me apologetics, really arguments in defense of the resurrection and the historicity of the claims of Jesus and all of that kind of stuff. And I thought, oh, this does make sense, and explain some of the how science might fit with Christianity and all this kind of stuff. And I sort of devoured that stuff and thought, this makes sense, and sort of recommitted myself to God at that point, sort of, just about becoming a student, and really have been carrying on as a Christian since then.
So you're now working with Christian Concern.
Yeah,
So we understand how you come to faith, and I love finding out that it's never really a linear progression for people. Even if you've
yeah,
been brought up in a Christian home, a really good Christian church, at some
yeah,
point we have to make that decision to commit, and
yes,
usually that decision to commit isn't because we're on a happy trail. It's usually because there's a challenge or something that's come for us to think, I think I need to do something different, which in a sense
yeah.
for you happened the same way. You had people that came along and said, this life trajectory that you're on, that let me try and help you explain something of how you are within this world.
Well, I was more asking them because I sort of, could see that they was experiencing something that I wasn't, that I knew really I'd kind of experienced as well. But I needed the intellectual backing for it. I needed the intellectual explanation
Hmm.
for it. And, I wasn't really at a crisis point particularly, but I was, struggling intellectually with how can I, what are the intellectual arguments for believing in this particular religion? And why should I, and so on. And as they presented me, I was also recommended books and resources and stuff. And that's because that's the kind of person I am. I read a lot of books, and I approach life in that kind of way. Other people approach life in a more emotional way, whatever. I don't think there's particularly necessarily right or wrong on that in a way. But for me, I need reasons for everything I do. And that was what I had to get to persuade me, to convince me to become a Christian, if you like.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like to not just be a Christian, but understand why. And the Bible
Yeah,
says, doesn't it? We should be able to have a reason for our faith, which to me is exactly what you're
exactly.
talking about. It's that
Yeah,
knowing intellectually, yes, I go to church, and yes, I believe there's something out there, but actually I believe that there's more than just something. There is a
yes,
real God who wants to have a personal relationship with me, sent his son Jesus Christ, and that then roots you in who you are. So yeah, I
yeah.
think that intellectual part, I definitely can understand that wanting to understand it from a give me reasons, help me to understand
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's very, very important. I'm passionate about that. And I think, particularly discipling young teenagers into a world that is becoming increasingly hostile to Christianity, you want to give them apologetics. You can't just sort of take them along to church and expect them to sort of just believe. You need to give them the reasons, the arguments, explain things to them. And then, if you do that over time, eventually they'll become confident and start challenging their friends and being confident as a Christian. It doesn't necessarily happen overnight, but it will happen when they see it. And I've seen that with my sons and stuff. And so, apologetics is very, very important in this time that we're living in, when increasingly people are anti-Christian and certainly skeptical of Christianity.
And then moving on to Christian Concern and you're head of public policy, but how did you go from wanting to have that intellectual understanding of why you believe in something to then working for Christian Concern and now helping others who are facing difficulty as a result of living in this world with a faith?
Yeah, so I sort of studied maths and computing at university, which I enjoyed, and ended up working in finance. I worked as a fund manager in the city here in London for 20 something years, and quite enjoyed that. It's lots of interesting, lots of variety. You get to know lots of stuff about lots of different companies. You get to meet chief executives of major companies in this country, and so on. And I was investing globally, actually. Excuse me, but. What sort of drew me into Christianity in the end was Islam, because 9/11 happened back in 2001, and I was like, wow. I'd heard of suicide bombers, but I assumed that they must always be poor, illiterate, easily manipulable people. But this was airline pilots who are not poor; they're well paid, and they're not poorly educated, and certainly not illiterate. They're well educated, and not easily manipulable people. And so, what is this religion that can motivate people like that to have such disregard for human life? So I embarked on a study of Islam, read up lots and lots of stuff about it, and became concerned by what I learnt, and started praying for opportunity to share really what I was learning with other people, and then came across Islamic finance. And I thought, well, I work in finance, I ought to understand Islamic finance. So I researched Islamic finance as well, and found that the then chair of HSBC's Sharia Advisory Board, a chap called Taqi Usmani, had written a book in English. And in this book, he asks the hypothetical question, do we still need to wage jihad in a country like Britain where we can freely build mosques and preach Islam? And he says, well, according to the Quran, killing should continue until they pay the jizya tax. That's the subjugation tax for non-Muslims in an Islamic state. So he clearly wanted full-on Islamic Sharia law, unafraid to say so in print, in English. And so I sort of wrote to a friend at HSBC and said, do you really think this chap should be on your advisory board? And he passed it on to their compliance team, who had a fit and had a panic and got rid of him. They left his son on that advisory board and various other imams who I'm sure knew of and probably sympathized with that view. And that kind of opened my eyes to what was really behind this. The agenda here is full on Sharia law. They're not limiting Sharia to finance. It's a way in. It's a way of legitimizing Sharia. Islamic finance is based on a modern radical interpretation of the Quran that says that Muslims can't borrow at interest. But in fact, the vast majority of Muslims throughout history and still today are happy to borrow and lend at interest. They see it as a prohibition on usury, much like we do as Christians in the Bible. So that kind of opened my eyes to it, and yeah, I sort of saw, gosh, what's happening here? And then as I was sort of praying for opportunity to share and talk about this and explain what I was learning, the answer to prayer I got was not what I wanted. I was asked to run a Sharia fund, so it would have been my name, Tim Dieppe, manager of a Sharia fund, and I thought, well, I can't do that in conscience because Sharia discriminates against non-Muslims and Christians and women. And so I had to sort of conscientiously object and try and persuade my colleagues that also we shouldn't do this, which I was not very successful in spite of having some strongly feminist colleagues. And I remember being called into my boss's office at very short notice, which never happens. You shouldn't be talking about religion in the workplace, Tim. And I was like, oh, in that case, we can't run a Sharia fund, can we? Because we would have to talk about religion then. He wasn't very happy about that. But it made my life quite difficult and stressful, and I reached out for help and ended up connecting with Christian Concern through that. In the end, that particular project didn't go ahead, but things carried on, and I ended up working behind the scenes a bit with Christian Concern on Islam-related issues. And some years later, Andrea, chief executive here, said, why don't you come and work for us full-time on this kind of thing? So that's really how I joined 9 years ago, coming up to 9 years ago. So I've been at Christian Concern now for very nearly 9 years. And I focused initially on Islam. I then broadened out to wider things because that was the way things developed. But I still try and retain a specialist interest in Islam and comment on, write about Islamic issues.
So the book that's coming out, excuse me, very, very shortly. I know you've got a copy with you. Just tell us a little bit about the book and the launch event, and we can get a bit more into the detail, I guess.
Great. So here it is, The Challenge of Islam. It's coming out. The launch is on the 6th of February. The subtitle is Understanding and Responding to Islam's Increasing Influence in the UK. The forward is by Dr. J. Smith, who is a famous, well-known apologist in relation to Islam. Worked for a long time here in London in Speaker's Corner, debating Muslims and so on. Yes, so it's really about the cultural challenge. I co-wrote a book a couple of years ago called Questions to Ask Your Muslim Friends, which is kind of dealing with the apologetic challenge, if you like, which people feel about how on earth do I talk to my Muslim friends about faith? Well, we tried to sort of break it down there and suggest lots of simple questions you could ask and compare Jesus and Muhammad and what difference does prayer make in your life and things like this. But this is really about the cultural challenge that Islam is growing in influence in this country in lots of different ways. I think we saw it most notably in the election last year, actually, with the Muslim vote, which was saying we've got all these constituencies with over 10% Islamic population, 10% being enough to swing most constituencies from one party to another, and several constituencies with over 30% Islamic. And they were campaigning for a very explicitly Islamic ticket. And obviously they got 5 independent MPs who are in Parliament exclusively on that ticket. And they claimed 50 MPs that they backed who are now in Parliament. Their demands being things like recognise the state of Palestine, but also adopt the APPG definition of Islamophobia, which I can come on to talk about, and also Sharia pensions in every workplace, schools allowing Islamic prayer in every school, and abolishing the offence, rarely used offence of undue spiritual influence in elections. In other words, wanting to tell people you're not a good Muslim if you don't vote for me, which is a criminal offence as it stands today. So this, the influence of Islam is now, whereas previously it would have been in sort of finance and Islamic finance, and we'll talk about that, but also in fashion and halal meat, and then the occasional terrorist attack and all this kind of stuff, and the grooming gangs and all of these kind of issues, and self-censoring of people being afraid to publish stuff that might criticize Muhammad, and publish anything that is images of Muhammad, all that kind of thing. Suddenly it's also broken out into politics now. I expect by the next election we'll have a full-on Islamic political party, and politicians are very aware, even if they didn't lose their seat, they lost their majorities very significantly, a lot of Labour MPs did, to the Muslim vote. And they're very aware that they want to capture that, and this is influencing our politics today.
There's an awful lot there. I'm guessing the book is going to help us to get that, because the thing is, some of this stuff might sound very alien and very, well, that can't possibly be happening. And yet we close our eyes if we're a fool, but actually there is stuff going on. I mean, like you just said, you were working in finance and you were asked to create Sharia finance. I don't actually understand that, but what is Sharia law? Because I hear about it and I genuinely, I don't actually know what that means.
Yes, so Sharia law is really the system that Muslims have for how to live your life, and it ends up being a legal code. It's a very legalistic religion. Islam is being compared to Phariseeism, really, because it's basically a very strictly strictly legalistic approach to religion. And Sharia law encompasses the range of things from what you can eat. So we all know that Muslims don't eat pork and stuff like that. And then it will extend to how you treat women, and family rules and polygamy and all of these other things, and how you treat non-Muslims in the Islamic State and all of that kind of stuff. They have prescriptions for all sorts of things. And it's made up of a sort of compendium of lots of different things that Muhammad said or was supposed to have said through his lifetime. Does that help you?
Yeah, a little bit. I think it's one of those things that you hear about it in the media and you think, okay, it's Sharia is something to do with the Islamic religion, but I don't actually know what it means in real terms, other than is it good or bad? Well, I'm sort of not feeling like it's a great thing, but I don't actually know more than that. So I suppose in a similar way, I like to be informed to make personal decisions based on knowledge, but sometimes getting that knowledge can be quite hard. So yes, no, it helps me quite a bit.
Yeah, good. So that's kind of how it is. And then the question is, which kind of Muslims you are in terms of how hardline you are and what you take in terms of these rules on Sharia and so on. And there are fatwas online. You can easily Google them that give rulings on all sorts of things that people ask questions about. Is it legitimate, halal? Halal means sort of authorized in a sense. So this is why you have halal food. Is it legitimate to do this practice or do that practice, or do this thing or that thing, and there are all sorts of fatwas from scholars about these various things, and debates that go on in Islam about it.
Christian Concern, I mean, I've known about what you do for quite a long time, and my perspective has always been they are there to bridge a gap of something's happened, I don't know what to do, where do I turn? I'll turn to Christian Concern, whether it is, as you say, a teacher who's like, I'm in trouble and I don't quite know what's going on, what do I do? Or the Darlington nurses, there's all this stuff going on, and I think often, where do we turn? What do we do? It's completely irrelevant, but I've been trying to work out some finance stuff personally, thinking, where do I go to ask the right question? Because even that, which should be fairly obvious and straightforward and simple, it really isn't. And I spoke to a bunch of accountants and they all gave me 15 different answers, it feels like. That's just basic commerce finance. And we're going way beyond that to stuff that we don't really know about. And that's why I'm really appreciative of what Christian is doing.
That's why, I try and break it down really in this book. Like there's a chapter on is Islam a religion of peace? And the point of this chapter is to argue that, well, depends how you define whether a religion is a religion of peace. If you say, I'm very happy to agree and pleased that the vast majority of Muslims are peace-loving, peace-abiding, law-abiding people, but Islam as defined by its texts, the religious texts, and the example of Muhammad, and also its practice through history, is not peaceful and has not been peaceful. And that's, I'll sort of go through all of that and argue that in some detail in this chapter in the book. And then, Sharia finance, well, there's a chapter on Sharia finance, explaining it and going through it and raising the issues and noting that, by the way, Britain is the first non-Muslim country in the world to issue a government Sharia bond. We've actually done 2 government Sharia bonds now, which are governed effectively by Sharia law partially. It's a very significant move on Britain's part to go down that line. And then other questions like, is Islam anti-Semitic? I did a debate on that with Professor Reza Aslan in the States this last year, and surprised to be asked because he's a professor and I'm not, and all of this. But I just sort of thought, well, the texts are so clear. I just have to go and read the text and say, there you are, QED, it's anti-Semitic. And this is how the debate went. And in my chapter in the book, I sort of go through all of the evidence that I presented and some that I didn't get a chance to present on that point, that Islam is, according to its text, very, very much clearly anti-Semitic. And then you've got other chapters on cultural issues like grooming gangs, freedom of speech, Islamophobia, and the particular definition of Islamophobia that I mentioned and the issues with that. And so on, and sort of discussing the various cultural things, and also providing some possible solutions, policy solutions that would make a difference.
So the book launch is the 6th of February. Where is that happening? I know it's in London, but I've forgotten the name of where it is.
In the Emmanuel Centre in Westminster, which is kind of Westminster is the nearest tube, I think, to that. And you need to get a ticket from Eventbrite. I'm sure you can provide the link somewhere on your channel to that, or look it up on Eventbrite. It's £10 for a ticket, but the book will come free, and the book has a recommended price of £12. So it's a bargain for a ticket there.
As a bargain, that covers part of your tube train at £2, doesn't it?
Exactly.
What can we expect from the book launch? I'm guessing you're going to be there. Just sort of giving a bit of an overview of some of the book?
Yeah, so it starts at 6, but we'll sort of formally launch with a talk or something, an introduction and a talk from about 6:30. And I'll sort of talk for about half an hour outlining some of the issues that the book covers. There'll be a Q&A session for a bit as well. I think Andrea will also, our chief executive, give a little bit of a talk and introduction, and then opportunity to mill around and meet people and chat and get signed copies if you'd like one. As well of the book, and there'll be drinks and snacks and stuff like that. We've got 140 people signed up already, so good number. So get your tickets fast because they're selling out quickly. But we're looking forward to a great evening there at that event on the 6th of February.
And once that's gone, is the book going to be available? I'm guessing on the Christian Concern website or Amazon? How are you getting the book?
Yeah, it'll be on Amazon, Kindle, Revived, Equipping the Church, CLC bookshops. All of that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Tim, thank you for bringing us this. I think it's one of those issues. I had a similar conversation about a completely different subject this morning. Quite often in the church, we don't like to talk about these things. We'd rather they just kind of go away, or we just don't know enough, so we get scared about what can we talk about this? Are we allowed to? So it is good to have people who are willing to say, look, this is what I've discovered. Here's some facts for you to understand. It's good to have that intellectual stuff, because otherwise it's just theoretical, and that's easy to forget about. But actually there are some hardline facts around that we need to know. And sometimes, where do we get that information? And we don't have many people who've worked in finance to the level you have that have said, well, this has been my personal experience. This is what's actually gone on and going on. And then you can dig deeper and reveal that to people. And that's one of the things I do like about Christian Concern, is you're bringing information about subjects that perhaps we wouldn't necessarily understand or even find out about for 101 different reasons, but it's great that we can. If people want to know more about Christian Concern, what's the website people can come to? Yeah,
christianconcern.com. By the way, you probably can find the thing through the events tab on the website as well if you want to get it there. And there's also an Islam, if you go to our issues page, there's an Islam issues page with various resources there on Islam if you want to learn more about Islam there as well.
Tim, thank you for your time and sharing this, writing this book. The launch event, 6th of February down in London. We'll put a link on as well after this that people can find your Eventbrite page and find out more. So, Tim,
brilliant.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks. Cheers.
Did you know Pure 24/7 Radio has a shop? Well, we do. You can buy merchandise while supporting the work that we do here. Simply head over to www.pure247radio.org/shop. That's www.pure247radio.org/shop.